Serious. Sailors, seamen and overall people who spend a vast amount of time in the ocean. Have you ever witnessed something you would catalogue as supernatural or unusual? What was it like?
Sailed on tall ships for a good while, among other things. Saw some green flashes, a moonbow, lots of phosphorescence, big whales, street almost fire on our mast, steel ship this time. But the only creepy story was at port. The only person who had ever died on the ship was over 100 years ago, and he fell from the rigging. Went splat. One of the crew was up furling sails, and was about to step out onto the footrope that runs along the yard. He said he got an overwhelming urge to not step on it, and felt a tug on his harness keeping him from stepping out. He was so freaked out he kept the other two guys behind him from getting on the line as well. The other guys started getting a really bad feeling too, and they decided to check out the footrope. It had been really degrading on the inside, even through the outside looked mostly fine. The line probably would have snapped as they climbed out there, and they would have fallen, as you are pretty much free climbing until you get to a stopping point.
I was on navigation watch with the second mate one night off the Philippines. The ship was on autopilot making for Manila. It was a clear, still, dark night. Through the binoculars I picked up navigation lights of another ship about 5 degrees off the port bow. It was well off, but I noted the bearing and checked the radar. Nothing. This was not unusual. If it was one of the small local fishing vessels, they can be hard to pick up. On the other hand, they usually don't bother with navigation lights either. Quickish technical detail. Skip. If familiar with the purpose and function of nav lights, navigation lights on a vessel are baffled so they can only be seen from a certain direction. Looking at a boat dead ahead, coming toward you, you will see a red light to the right of a green light. This is what I could see. If the boat turns to their right, or starboard, the two lights will begin to move together, and the green light will fade from view because of the baffles that are around it. As the turn continues, you will be able to see the red port, their left side, light only, and a bit later the white stern light will appear as the red fades behind its baffles. This way you can tell in an instant the orientation of another vessel in the dark. 10 minutes passed and I checked the bearing again. Still 5 degrees off the port bow, red and green visible. I checked the radar again. Still nothing. I alerted the second mate. 5 minutes later, nothing changed, nothing on radar. We were on a collision bearing with an invisible vessel that was steadily getting closer. As a precaution we switched back to manual steering and I took the helm. By now I could make out the lights without the binoculars, still coming directly at us. We were on the point of taking evasive measures when suddenly the lights started moving together. We assumed that the other vessel had finally spotted us and was turning away to their right. I was expecting the red light to fade from view. Except it didn't. The two lights simply swapped position, the red went to the left and the green went to the right. They remained 5 degrees off the port bow. And then they moved back again. Still, nothing on radar, nothing through the binoculars. We eventually passed the lights within 20 meters. From the wing of the bridge I could see with perfect clarity straight down at it, whatever it was. There was nothing to see except the two lights, one red and one green, floating freely in air about 10 feet above the ocean, reflecting back off the waves, gently and occasionally swapping positions in the night.
I saw almost the same phenomenon. They were over the countryside in the Pacific Northwest, at high altitude, in the middle of the day. There was one red light, and one green light, and they were dancing around each other, for lack of a better term, in alternating synchronized, then desynchronized patterns. It was hard to tell exactly how large they were. My estimate is that they were at least 10,000 AGL and about 30 to 40 feet in diameter. They would accelerate instantly from a complete standstill to what was, based on my estimation of their size and altitude, hypersonic speed, then decelerate to a complete standstill just as quickly. They didn't seem to have any kind of inertia, accelerating from one axis to the next without any kind of intermediary yaw or bank. My friend spotted them first, and then after taking a moment to point them out to the rest of us, they were way up there. We all stared at him for a good 15 minutes. Crazy stuff.
A maelstrom in Norway. It's actually really fascinating, but looking down into the currents it's a bit freaky. Look it up, it's like a load of whirlpools all happening together. Flew helicopters in the Navy for a few years. On my first deployment to Southeast Asia I was flying over the Sea of Japan and saw a large pulsing aura of red light far enough below the surface I could not make out a source. We were 30-ish miles from shore and had not been briefed on any assets in the area that might make something like that make sense. No erroneous indications on instruments or radio chatter. Just slow steady pulsing red light. We saw it, circled it a few times, made a note of the time and location we encountered it, and my crew chief asked if I wouldn't mind getting the hell out of there. So we finished our transit and I made a note of everything in my debrief. I passed it up the chain of command, but they basically wrote it off as some sort of visual phenomenon we had from a long day of flying in dry suits. It's always been hard to imagine our entire crew hallucinating the same thing. Edit. I didn't think this would blow up, but I appreciate all the input. As some of you have suggested possible submerged man-made objects like buoys, I would say this is unlikely due to the sheer size of what we saw. Underwater volcanic activity, as some of you suggest, actually makes a lot of sense. The light was probably 50 meters across and very bright. Those of you that suggested volcanic activity, I would like to ask if it would have something like a rhythm to it. The light would slowly brighten for about 3 seconds, dim for the same amount of time, then remain completely off for the same amount of time. If anyone knows, I'd appreciate it, and I could pass it to some of the guys that were on that crew and maybe put some dudes at ease.
My first thought when I read this was that I've heard Japanese vessels carrying dangerous cargo are required to display a flashing red light, at night or in ports or something like that. I couldn't find anything else about it, but I suppose it's possible you saw a mirage or reflection of that in the water. Just a thought.
Old man, what did you see? Holds lighter to Op's face. Gojira. Link Gojira. Gojira. Gojira.
I was a shell fisherman for a while. The one thing that freaked me out the most, I was chest deep in the water harvesting oyster lines, when I started to see swirls of water like something was swimming just under the surface, and it was coming towards me. Really freaked me out. Then a head popped up right next to me and it was a little seal. Scared the poo out of me, I yelled, which in turn scared the seal. We both turned and went our own ways.
The image of a man and a seal bumping into each other and screaming while running the other way is hilarious.
When I was roving patrol on a submarine, I always thought I saw someone walking parallel to me down missile compartment upper level. If I was on the port side, then I saw them on the starboard side and vice versa. I always chalked it up to pipes and valves creating weird shadows. Additionally, it felt heavy on that level, like there was some sort of presence. The feeling you get when someone's watching you. I never told anyone. Then one day a few weeks into patrol, one of the other rovers asked me if it felt weird up there. He specifically said that he saw someone up there too, just like I had. We shared stories and then talked to the third rover, and he said, I only go up there to do my rounds every hour, then get the F out of that haunted level.
Low-frequency sounds can cause that kind of eerie feeling. You can't hear it, but you can feel something is off, but you can't exactly determine what it is. I imagine a submarine's engine is running most of the time and being sound dampened. It probably doesn't make a lot of sound in the audible spectrum. I wouldn't be surprised if low-frequency sound, in an otherwise quiet environment, was the cause of that feeling.
The closest to supernatural, or at least something I can't explain, happened halfway between Cornwall and the Scillies. We were sailing in a fresh breeze, 5 to 6 feet, swells maybe. That's perfectly fine sailing weather, but the boat will rock and there will be quite a bit of noise from the wind, the sails and waves. So we sail happy along when suddenly the sea is perfectly flat and everything is quiet, like somebody turned the sound off. I look around and the water is pitch dark. It only lasted for a minute and then everything was back to normal, but I got a really eerie feeling.
I have a theory. I think you sailed over a large patch of spilled oil. Oil stops waves. Link. Half serious, but this would explain the ocean's color, and in large enough quantity, the oil could suppress the swell.
Man, when I read your account I got this thought: there is nothing here, like, absolutely nothing, but depth under your ship. Oceans are amazing, but scary as hell.
Fog. I don't care what anyone says, there is something in that fog. And #X200B. Edit, not a joke. A dead calm with thick fog is creepy and will drive you to wild hallucinations. I imagine it's not dissimilar to a sensory deprivation chamber.
I have a story about almost getting run down by an 800 feet Great Lakes freighter in a thick fog bank. We were on a 35 feet racing sailboat. Couldn't see the bow from the cockpit, fog was so bad. A crew member said, "I hear a bow wake," and moments later, a wall of steel appeared out of the fog. We were sailing right into the side of it. We could have touched it with a boat pole. That was the most scared I've ever been on the water.
OMG, that sounds terrifying. I'm thankful that most of my fog experience was in cruising boats, so we'd have radar a lot of the time.
I can agree with you that fog puts you in a different frame of mind. I was delivering a 75 feet custom up to Connecticut from Tortola when somewhere off Long Island we hit dead calm, flat seas and unbelievable thick fog. Drop sails and motor onward. We had radar so wasn't terribly worried, but we were crossing convergence zones for NY, so it was mildly hairy. Suddenly we entered a lobster pot field. My watchmate went forward to guide us through the field, but the fog was so thick that we had to develop a signaling solution with a red handheld to tell me to go to port, starboard or neutral. It was exhausting. After, I don't know, maybe an hour of this, we hear the loudest booming crack that either of us had ever heard. I thought a ship had exploded somewhere out there in the soup, so went to neutral and was trying to figure out what the hell was going on according to the radar, and called up the captain in case we needed to go render aid to a mishap. Captain comes up, I explain the circumstances and he just grins. It was the Concorde.
That's hilarious.
Have you ever seen approximately 30 to 40, as best as I could determine, humpback whales feeding together? I know this isn't supernatural, but one whale is so seldom seen by people, let alone 30 scooping up krill at the same time. I'll never forget that.
I had the chance to go whale watching off the coast of Maine many years ago, and my family happened to pick the day that a pod of 15 humpbacks decided to bubble feed all around us. Our captain told us he had been working for that company for almost 30 years doing daily excursions, and he had never seen that many together at once. It really is a humbling experience.
I crewed on a tall ship and we were anchored with a bunch of others in a harbor. We had to take shifts at night because it was an old boat and did weird things. I was on shift in the little steering cabin when I heard someone running around the deck. I thought it was one of the other crew, so I poked my head out and told them to knock it off. They kept running and I was afraid they'd slip, so I followed them. We went around the whole ship twice before I caught up with a shapeless shadow which stopped and flew directly up into the air. Convinced it was a prank, I walked back to the end of the boat when I saw we had drifted on anchor and were almost under the bow of a much larger ship. I called the rest of the crew and we sorted it out. But I might not have noticed until too late if it weren't for the weird shadow.
That's a klabouterman.
In the Gulf of Aden, having been at sea for a while and with absolutely blistering heat, I heard my nickname called 3 times. Clearly and loudly. It was my first time with this particular crew and none of them knew my nickname. My best guess is dehydration and stress, but I'll never forget it.
When I was forward lookout, I saw a ball-type object bouncing right to left at the horizon. Definitely was no satellite nor a planet, star. Not too sure what it was. Edit. It bounced like say a ball would. Was kind of a weird experience, and if I remember right it was somewhere near Australia. Edit 2. Since people keep asking, this was around 7 years ago.
Could it have been ball lightning?
I was a sailor in the Navy. While I was on lookout duty on the bridge at night, a dude walked and stood beside me, breathing hard. I was looking out at sea and I was blocking the stairs going down, so I turned around to whisper, "Sorry," and what do you know, there's no one. I was tired, so I chalked this up to hallucination, but it felt real. Edit. We were in the South China Sea. Edit. Pretty neat to see other Army, Navy folks with similar, if not the same exact experience.
How many hours were you on duty that night? I swear I had experiences like that even in the barracks on land from sleep deprivation.
We were 6 hours on and 6 hours off, and we were a few days in. That's why I'm leaning more on fatigue-induced hallucination than the paranormal.
Wow, this is frightening. There was no one around at all.
No, there was the officer on watch, helmsman, petty officer, 2 navigators, and another lookout. It wasn't crowded and no one else was standing next to me, but I was the closest to the only stairway in the bridge, so yeah. Oh, I forgot to add, the bridge is nearly pitch dark, and that's so we can look out better. But yet the person was standing so close to me that at the corner of my eye, he looked like he was in uniform.
I was standing in the hangar bay waiting for morning muster at dawn somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Looking out at the ocean, I was intrigued by how smooth as glass the water was reflecting the clouds in the sky. Then the most beautiful, confusing, mesmerizing, and terrifying thing I ever saw happened. The water, for a moment, was so smooth that the horizon disappeared from view. The water was so smooth and reflective that it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the sky began. I honestly got dizzy knowing I was in the middle of the ocean floating on water, but my eyes were trying to convince me the ship was floating on nothing. Then the water started slightly rippling and the horizon was visible again. Every morning at sea after that I looked at the horizon hoping it would happen again, but it never did. I've never found out what caused this scientifically. The closest thing I could ever find was it was some sort of variant of the Fata Morgana mirage. I don't think I will ever see anything as beautiful in my life ever again. Words fall extremely short at describing the feeling in that moment.
I saw a sunrise like that while I was sailing back in 2008. I've never seen the sea so calm before. I remember thinking the same thing as you, that it was like a giant piece of glass as far as the eye could see, reflecting pale yellow and orange and blue as the sun rose. Then it was like the sea and sky merged and it was almost like being upside down. I half expected to look up and see a reflection of myself and the ship above me. I didn't have my camera. I'm kind of glad. I got to lose myself in those few moments, burning the image into my brain forever. One day I might be lying senile in a bed in some hospital, no knowledge of who or where I am, but I'll still remember that golden mirror morning.
Yes, this is exactly how it felt. No sense of direction or location. Felt like being upside down and sideways at the same time. There was no sky or ocean. Just one ether the ship was floating on. Crazy. Thank you for putting it into words.
I saw that once, like the ocean was one big flat piece of glass, so beautiful and massive, the reflection of the sun and the blue sky was intense, has to be the calmest ocean I've ever encountered. Very eerie too, make you feel so small.
It's difficult to explain isn't it? Saying it's like a mirror just doesn't do it justice.
Oh sure, lots of auditory hallucinations. You're all alone in the middle of the ocean, and you hear your name being called all the time. Or you're down below, and hear someone running on the deck.
Do you get any sort of training or warning like, look, you'll eventually hear somebody calling your name, or do you just get used to that sort of stuff?
Machine spaces when the kit isn't running. I hate doing my rounds down there because even though I know no one else is awake at 0200, I feel eyes on me.
One of the most magical nights I ever had was when I was serving in a NZ Navy warship, and we were homeward bound after a long and unpredictable deployment. I was dealing with a bout of insomnia, and decided to go down aft for a breath of fresh air. It was a very dark, moonless night, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I really began to appreciate the phosphorescence glowing in our wake, bright green against the dark water. Then I looked closer, to see a pod of dolphins playing in the phosphorescence, leaving their own bright glowing trails as they streaked through the water. Now, I knew what it was, and what caused it, but it was something that I imagine would have appeared quite mystical to sailors back in the past. It was stunning though. I sat and watched them for about an hour. Such a vivid memory.
Seeing bioluminescent bacteria is such a cool experience. I had the pleasure of seeing it once on the coast of Cape Cod in the summer. All the waves were crashing with this blue glow along the wave pattern. Really a surreal feeling.
That sounds beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
St. Elmo's fire, in the Coral Sea. Extremely unsettling, and beautiful.
I've seen St. Elmo's fire as well. During a storm in the Atlantic, bursting out of, just above our mast, I was in a 40-foot sailboat, and am definitely not a 400-year-old sailor from the age of sail. It was pretty cool and I actually thought it was lightning striking our ship at first, but it wasn't bright enough, damaging. Edit. My clarifying comment that I am not a ghost sailor has a lot of people asking questions already answered by my comment.
Ye, all sailors took it as a good omen.
I read a story here once where someone had family who sailed around the world. One day in the North Atlantic, their sailboat was going over some gigantic swells. They didn't have brakes at the top, so it was safe, but the boat was rising and falling way beyond the neutral. At the bottom of a trough their uncle looked up to see the sun behind a wave and the silhouette of a whale inside, above him.
Like this, but with whales. https://petapixel.com/2019/0/2025/this-photo-shows-sharks-inside-wave/closing parenthesis.
I can believe that. Just go to YouTube and watch as those gigantic waves make skyscraper PR-sized cargo ships look tiny by comparison.
My dad's done some trips into the Atlantic single-handed. He's reported many hallucinations. Mostly auditory, like hearing people call his name etc. but more scarily once he thought he saw a container ship about to run him down. You can't really sleep properly for the first few days because of all the coastal fishing boats, so it was probably just down to sleep deprivation.
Alone in a small boat on the Atlantic. That's gonna be a huge, no thank you, from me.
I hear people call my name sometimes because of sleep deprivation, and I'm not even out at sea, so I can't imagine how much worse it would be alone on the ocean.
I don't spend much time on the water, but about 10 years ago I saw a Flying Dutchman, the optical illusion of a ship floating above the water on the horizon.
I work security on different ships. One time during night shift on a cruise ship, my colleague and I were in the security office watching the CCTV cameras and just talking poo to pass the time. At the exact same time, we both saw a black figure, shadow pass in front of the camera in the children's play area. We both got super freaked out but kept watching the other cameras in the vicinity to see if whatever it was passed by those, as it was the only way it could go from where we saw it and there was no way it could leave the area without passing by in front of one of the cameras. It never did, so we went to the area to check it out but obviously found nothing. Afterwards we went back to review the footage and didn't see any shadow moving in that camera again, even though we both saw it the first time in the live feed. Needless to say, we kinda started avoiding the kids area at night after that. A lot of death happens out at sea.
I know this is boring, but I had a night watchman friend who kept capturing ghosts on camera, but when I saw the footage it always looked like a gnat flew close to the lens and an optical illusion made it look 8 feet tall and on the ground.
I got one for ya. I was in the USN 2010 to 2014 and deployed twice on 2 different ships. The first ship I was on, the USS Pearl Harbor LSD-52, we were deployed doing a Westpac. There was a span of time where we were just sailing around in open waters, not near any land whatsoever. I was one of the topside watchstanders, meaning that I was responsible for reporting any other sea or air activity, i.e. other boats or airplanes. The area we were in was so incredibly remote that there was almost no activity anywhere, didn't see a single boat or plane for days. One night I was standing the midnight to 4 a.m. watch and had just switched to the forward lookout. So I'm standing at the bridge of the ship on the outer deck looking forward. It must have been about 3:45 a.m. because my relief just came up to let me know he would take over from here. We talked for a few minutes when all of a sudden I got a call from the bridge. The officer on duty was asking me what that was. Me and my watch relief look forward and there is this giant light coming out of the ocean. This thing was huge, probably the size of 2 mobile homes put side by side. It comes up from the ocean and then passes overhead maybe 70 feet from the top of the ship, and there was absolutely no sound. Everyone started freaking out. And the craziest thing is that none of our radars picked up any activity whatsoever. We all were just in awe. And no one had any explanation, but we all agreed that we witnessed a UFO.
I only worked as a walk-on, walk-off cabin attendant, but the old sea dogs always had far-fetched stories to tell. The engineer teaching us about watertight doors told us a story that happened to him on another ship that the same company used to own but was decommissioned and SCRPD in 2011. These watertight doors separate the different bulkheads, underwater compartments that stop the whole ship from sinking if there is a hole in the hull. Think about the metal doors that slid down in the engine room of the Titanic. These doors are always closed. To get from compartment to compartment there was a lever that you pulled and the door opened. You stepped through, then as soon as you let go of the lever, the door would close. For the safety of the ship it would close tight shut, even if there was a person blocking it. On this older ship there was an engineer who tripped and was crushed to death in one of these doors. Years later this engineer who told me the story tripped and fell on that same door and was about to be crushed to death in the same way. But just before killing him, it stopped and opened again, despite no one being around and nothing touching the lever. And before anyone says that there must have been some safety thing installed. No. As I said before, the one job of these doors is to close no matter what, or who is in the way.
I can respect bro ghosts like that. Must have sucked to die that way. I can see how he'd not want anybody to die like that, too.
I don't believe in ghosts, but if I had to pick one story to believe, it'd be this. That first dude that died did not want that guy to die the same way he did.
I was in the U.S. Navy and worked in communications. I was a supervisor on my watch and enjoyed working the night tours while on deployment. We stood 12-hour watches from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Around 2 a.m. I hear some chatter over the 3 megacoulombs, which is like our internal speaker system used between a few different stations on the ship. It's the bridge asking combat if they see anything on surface or air radar, maybe 10 miles out to our west. Combat returns with a negative and I don't think anything of it. About 15 minutes goes by and the bridge asks again, and asks are they sure there's nothing there. Then they ask us if we have any message traffic about any ships in the area, aircraft or anomalous weather patterns. I ask one of the guys and watch to perform the request and now my interest is piqued. I walk out of the comm center and head up to the bridge. I was on a frigate so the walk was quick, and I get up there and ask what's going on. One of my buddies points me over to the port side and we walk over. There's about 5 or 6 circular-shaped lights about 10 to 15 miles out in the clouds, pretty large. They aren't moving or flying around but just looking stable. These lights are also casting lights downward on the ocean, and you can see the light refracting back at the water, almost as if it were a spotlight or a beam. From what we could see, it didn't appear to be lights shining up from the water because they wouldn't pass through the clouds. The clouds also weren't super thick, it was lightly overcast, and it was the middle of the night with no other light pollution on the water. There was nothing in message traffic about any ships, subs, or aircraft in the area. We were hundreds of miles from land and the last report of any unusual weather patterns was a waterspout a few hundred miles away. We tried to take pictures with our onboard digital camera, using a long exposure, but we couldn't capture the phenomenon. After about 90 minutes the lights slowly faded, one by one, and within 15 minutes they had completely disappeared. I'm sure there's some sort of weather or atmospheric condition for what we saw, but for all intents and purposes, it fit the description of a UFO. Unidentified flying object.
I had a similar experience. The beams of light looked like massive searchlights on a helicopter, searching the water for something. Was very unnerving. This was in northern Ontario, Canada. We chalked it up to really strong northern lights and a very mottled cloud cover.
Fascinating. Based on your explanation that sounds very similar to what I saw. I experienced this in the Caribbean, during the summer months and very far from any viewable northern lights.
I commend your storytelling, truly captured me in the moment. What do you personally believe it was?
Thank you. Trying to be logically and scientifically minded, it would have to be some sort of weather anomaly. Maybe the moon refracting off of water molecules in the air. However, the moon wasn't out that night, so I'm inclined to believe that it would need to be some perfect atmospheric conditions to create multiple disc-shaped lights that projected downward. On the other end of the spectrum, extraterrestrial probes or spacecraft. For whatever reason they'd want to be there.
It was about 3 a.m. during my watch on an ocean passage. I was sleep-deprived and fatigued. The sailing yacht was silhouetted against the moon glistening on the water. Suddenly a dolphin jumped from the water below the boom, broad reach, and splashed back in. Then again, then again, then again for the next 3 hours, with the exact position and sound over and over and over. I felt like I was descending into madness because I couldn't stop the apparent delusion. I'm still not sure if there ever was a dolphin, or if it just happened once and was then stuck in some sort of mental loop.
The games they play can really throw us on a loop. I was on a cruise in Alaska and dolphins seem to spend most of their time playing games that make them laugh, like they are cracking jokes for hours on end.
On a yacht delivery from France to Greece, after a couple of nights of no sleep, on the third night we were in the Bonifacio Straits. All around in the sea I could see drowning people, waving and shouting for help. We moored up the following morning. Sleep deprivation is a hell of a thing.
So that UFO that was buzzing around the USS Nimitz off the coast of San Diego in 2004. I was aboard the USS Princeton at that time. I was a fire controlman, meaning I had access and knowledge to the ship's radar systems. The Princeton was the air command, defense platform for the Nimitz strike group. The whole phenomenon was 100% real, and I remember watching the exact same videos you've seen on CNN back then. Weird thing is the video was a regular MP4 video, or some kind of video file or another. The video made its way around the ships and within 48 hours it was completely gone. Vanished. Just like that off the ship's LAN. It was all anyone could talk about for a full day, then no one ever talked about it again. Weird.
Marine here. It's not supernatural in the sense you are speaking about, but when Navy ships are running dark in certain waters due to certain times in history, venture back to the stern where the prop is churning up water. If conditions are right, the waves will look like they have electricity running through them. Due to the chop it will stir up algae that glow, but the patterns the chop makes is just mesmerizing.
When diving I saw a crioid star standing on all 5 points. Remind me of the aliens from War of the Worlds. Very unusual.
Was an AUV pilot on a ship mapping the Titanic debris field for the Titanic's 100-year anniversary episode on the History Channel. It was a 3x5 mile survey, so a lot of area that hadn't been mapped before. The ROV on board was taking video footage of the larger hull section, and would bump into the Titanic when they got too close, and parts of the hull would get stuck to the ROV we called rusticles. I was 22 at the time, and thought cool, part of the Titanic hull, and took a big chunk of iron hull. Wrote to my dad about it, very excited about my new artifact. He has been an ocean explorer for my whole life, and is very easygoing pretty much all the time, but he became extremely serious after I told him. He said, let's not tempt fate here. Don't ever take anything from a grave site. Ever. Throw it back in the ocean. Please. I guess he has friends that swore they had become cursed after taking artifacts from grave sites, like the strange curses of the archaeologists who opened some of the pyramids of Egypt. So as any 22-yo would do, I kept it in my bunk room. Sure enough, the next day I got this awful fever and felt terribly ill. Very off, and was bedridden on a work trip. No one else on the ship was sick, and of course naturally thought, I'm cursed. I got the plague, so threw it back when we were back over the wreck site, and sure enough got better that day. I mentioned it to some of our more senior team and they all had stories of people getting cursed after taking and keeping things from a grave site. And that things would mystery get better if they returned what they had taken. Weird juju there. Respect the dead.
Let's not tempt fate here. Your father does sound like an interesting guy.
I was stationed on a ship where something tragic had occurred in the past and several people had died. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but there were several people on my ship that believed it was haunted. Especially in the middle of the night, there were several people who claimed that they had a supernatural experience where something moved or got flung across the room as if by a ghost, or someone once swore they actually saw a ghost. Like I said, I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but I swear there were times in the midnight hours where I felt an unsettling otherworldly presence. I even had a nightmare on the ship about a ghost finding me in my rack that had decided they were going to follow me from then on, and it really freaked me out. Honestly, though, I hate to break anyone's bubble, but looking back I really don't think there was anything supernatural going on. I think we were all stressed out and overworked on deployment, standing watches at all hours with very little sleep at times, so I honestly think we were all imagining it.
When tired I'm prone to having hallucinations just as I fall asleep. Has to do with the visual cortex shutting down just before the rest of the brain does. When this happens, the brain will happily generate all kinds of exciting imagery such as giant spiders and fun characters. So I was on a 3-week sea trial for a project that I was working on at the time, 12 to 14-hour days and generally a lot of stress as we worked through the numerous issues we needed to tackle to get the ship approved. Sure as hell, I was tired all the time. I lay down in my bunk, just thinking about what needed to be done tomorrow. This kid, I reckon 8 to 10 years old, brown hair, walks into my hut, sits down on my desk and then proceeds to lunge straight at me as I jolt against the bulkhead, screaming in terror as my brain fully wakes up. Fun times. Being on board this ship, my hallucinations were the most vivid I've ever had.
This happened to a friend of mine, let's call him Dave, who worked on an offshore rig. He wasn't much of a believer in supernatural stuff and spirits. Mostly cause he had never experienced anything and thought that most stories were just exaggerated. In the past that rig faced a tragedy where it was set ablaze and many people lost their lives. The captain at the time was the type of person who would help people first and then look after himself. He ran into a flaming room to help a few people who were stuck inside, and while helping them he lost his life. As they were able to control the fire and eventually kill it, many people lost their lives and it would take days for ships to arrive to carry the deceased back to the mainland. So they stored all the corpses in one room. That room was the captain's room. Years later, after the rig was rebuilt and functional again, Dave started working on it as a fresher. Being the new guy, he was given small jobs at first so that he would familiarize himself with everything. He didn't know this when he joined, but the room that was allotted to him was the same room that they stored the bodies in, also the captain's room. Dave was supposed to have a roommate bunk with him, but the guy would join him a week later. Before his roommate joined, every other night Dave would wake up to being violently shaken in his bed while hearing someone yell, "There's a fire! There's a fire!" He would also dream of people that he never knew. He'd see their faces and the next thing would be glimpses of them burnt. This frightened the poo out of Dave. He approached his captain and spoke to him about all that happened. His captain then revealed the whole story of what happened and whose room he was occupying. The captain told Dave that if this persisted then he'd change the room. But fortunately that was the same day Dave's roommate joined and the thing stopped happening. One day while getting off a crane from the ladder, Dave missed his step and was about to fall. Although it was just a few feet above the platform, with all the equipment he had on he would have definitely fractured something and wouldn't be able to work for months. But as he was falling, someone held him from behind and pushed him back onto the ladder. He grabbed on and got down safely. As he turned to thank the person, he could find nobody there. When he went to the cafeteria, he asked his colleagues who was out there with him so that he could thank them. His colleagues revealed that he was the only one out there at that time. He found it weird but didn't say much about it. Dave approached the captain again and spoke to him about this. His captain told him that it was most likely the captain who died on the rig, saving and helping people while he still can. Now if you ask Dave about his belief in this stuff, he'll give you a really puzzled look as though he himself is still trying to make logic and reason out of what he experienced.
Good guy, Captain Ghost.
I work on a cargo ship on the Great Lakes here in Canada. Each time we leave a river or seaway we have to walk across the deck, no matter the weather, and secure the anchors. It's an easy thing to do and usually it's uneventful. It was a beautiful, clear night and as the stars twinkled I couldn't help but gaze up at them as I walked the starboard deck forward. While I was looking up I thought I heard someone to the left of me say, "Hey." Instinctively I stopped, looked over and saw no one, but as I went to start forward again, in front of me was a 1.5 foot high diamond-plated step-up we have to cover the deck's array of pipes and cables. I would have tripped up and hit the steel deck like a bag of sand, as I've seen happen before. I thought it was coincidental, but the more time I spent on the deck, certain things kept happening, like the sound of footsteps, sometimes even my name being called, that made me curious about the presence of something or a higher power aboard. I brushed it off and let it sit in the back of my mind, and convinced myself I wasn't going mad. Sure enough, the season ended, and I went home for the winter. When time came to head back in the spring, there was talk about a person named Larry amongst the winter work welders. They were talking about him as if he was a person of great interest, a person who was cheery but you don't mess with, a sailor, by the sounds of it. They talked about him messing around, causing a stir over the winter on multiple occasions. I decided to ask about this Larry guy, as in the marine industry people come and go, thinking I maybe might know of him. Turns out Larry was an old seafarer, who passed away years ago, but still comes out for his watch on deck. Some said they've seen him in the corner of their eye but paid no attention, as a deckhand would if he noticed a mate watching him scrub the deck. Others said they heard him, and others said he kept hiding their tools, which I couldn't help but laugh at. Anyways, I am a believer of spirits, and/or the presence of a higher power. I think he looks out for the safety of the boat and the crew aboard her. Or maybe spending a month or more aboard a 740 feet freighter makes one hear what is not heard by others. I'd like to believe the former. Anyways, thanks Larry, old buddy. Saved me from some busted up chins, maybe even a few teeth. I owe you one.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.